Hey guys, tonight we're brushing open the sliding screens of ancient Japan and stepping into a world of moonlit corridors, lacquered boxes of ink, and quiet court banter. You're in a silk robe that rustles like wind in pine, your face powdered pale as porcelain, and your teeth, well, let's just say they've been intentionally dyed the shade of a wet inkstone. You're beautiful, by hand standards at least. Your real eyebrows, gone. Replaced with delicate ovals painted high on your forehead like twin commas of elegance. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive this world for more than a day. There's no Google Translate, no plumbing, and the wrong potic reference could ruin your reputation faster than a wine spill on white silk. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I love knowing which corners of the world we're dozing off in together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Kyoto. The year is somewhere in the 900s. Outside, the air is damp with the hush of pine trees. Inside, the palace flickers with lanterns. You can smell the faint trace of incense. A lawswood, maybe, or clove. A court lady in layered robes glides past like a ghost in silk. No footsteps. Just a whisper of fabric on floorboards and a soft waft of plum blossom perfume. This is the Heian period, often described as Japan's classical age. A time when the nobility lived not just for status or politics, but for aesthetic perfection. They measured beauty in moonlight, pewtree, and the length of one's sleeves. If you're thinking, wow, sounds peaceful, you're mostly right. But also exhausting. These people curated their lives like walking museum exhibits. Every glance, every gesture, every eyebrow was intentional. Speaking of eyebrows, let's talk about yours. Well, not yours exactly, because yours have been shaved clean off. Courtiers of high rank, especially the women, would remove their natural brows and instead paint new ones higher on the forehead using ink or soot mixed with oil. These painted brows were called hikimeyu, and they weren't just decoration. They were social code, like a perfect email sign-off in visible form. The higher and more elegantly shaped your hikime, the more refined your reputation. But don't imagine big cartoon arcs. These were subtle, oval or crescent like smudges, dark against the powdered white of your face. Just a hint, a suggestion, like punctuation on a poem. Now, while you're adjusting to the idea of erasing half your face to gain beauty points, let's look at the tools involved. You'd likely be using a small inkstone, maybe inherited from your mother or passed down from a court tutor. The ink, ground from soot. The applicator, a tiny brush of animal hair. And if you're thinking, that sounds a lot like calligraphy, that's not a coincidence. These folks treated their faces like scrolls, a touch dramatic. Yes, but also weirdly poetic, and the rest of your face, just as curated. You've dusted in thick rice powder, white as snowfall. Your lips are tinted a sharp vermilion, though only the center, not the edges. Think doll's mouth, not lipstick ad. And if you're married, or at least of age, you've darkened your teeth with iron-based dye, giving them a gleaming, ink-black sheen. Yes, this was the beauty standard. Eyebrows like brush strokes, teeth like lacquered obsidian. Historians still argue whether these trends were entirely homegrown or subtly influenced by earlier Chinese customs, but either way, they took root and bloomed into something uniquely Japanese. But here's a quirk: despite all the face painting and eyebrow inking, mirrors were rare. Only the wealthiest owned polished bronze mirrors, and they didn't provide much detail. So most of your makeup routine, done from memory and muscle, or with the help of a trusted lady in waiting. You had to feel your beauty more than see it. An oddly modern concept, if you think about it. And when it came to grooming, privacy was a luxury. Many noblemen spent hours behind folding screens, not because they were shy, but because exposure to male eyes was taboo. You might be the most elegant person in the room and still never show your face to a potential suitor. Instead, he'd judge your handwriting, your voice, your scent, and the shape of your inked brows glimpsed in candlelight. Like speed dating via haiku, the whole system was built on restraint and implication. No big laughs, no bold gestures, just delicate clues. A flutter of a fan, a few darkened teeth revealed behind a sleeve, an eyebrow barely raised. If all this seems subtle to the point of absurd, remember that in a world without selfies or Snapchats, beauty lived in performance. And performance thrived on suggestion. It's said that many court romances began not with eye contact, but with a poem left on a pillow, or a scent lingering in the hallway. One famous high-end lady even claimed you could fall in love with someone just by the way they folded a letter. Not sure how well that would work on Tinder. Strict codes. There's a reason this era produced some of the most emotionally intricate literature in Japanese history. The famous Tale of Genji, often called the world's first novel, was written by a court lady named Murasaki Shikibu. Strict codes. She understood how beauty worked like social currency, and how much it could cost. In this world, you don't shout your feelings. You brush them onto paper with ink mixed from the same pot you used for your eyebrows. You start to see it now. Why eyebrows mattered. They weren't just decoration. They were identity. They told others where you stood. Socially, romantically, even spiritually. They whispered where words weren't allowed to shout. And, as the lantern light dims and the ink on your brow dries, you begin to feel the shift. You're not just playing dress-up in ancient robes, you're stepping into an entire way of seeing, where emotion is hinted, beauty is built in layers, and the boldest expression is a quiet one. You wake early. Or rather, you're gently stirred by the sounds of a waking court. Soft sandal taps on polished wood, the murmur of attendants, the unmistakable creak of a sliding J screen. The morning air is cool and a little damp, clinging to your sleeves as you rise. Outside, mist coils through the garden pines like lazy smoke. Inside, someone is preparing ink. You stretch, not too much, just enough for the many layers of your robes to shift around you like petals opening. Today, like every day, begins with careful ritual. The art of becoming beautiful isn't about transformation. It's about returning to form. Reapplying the hikimayu where your eyebrows once were. Patting on white powder until your face resembles the full moon. Dabbing your lips with the smallest touch of red. It's not about standing out. It's about fitting the aesthetic harmony of court life like the final syllable of a poem. And court life is, make no mistake, a competition, but not the kind with swords or shouting. Here, battles are fought with wit, with grace, and with perfectly painted brows. The Heian period elite believed outward beauty was a mirror of inner refinement. If your robes were correctly layered, if your sleeves trailed just so, and your hikame sat elegantly above your powdered eyes, you were signaling not vanity, but virtue. You take a seat by a lacquered writing table. An inkstone rests there, one you've ground yourself, though servants sometimes assist. The brush feels balanced in your hand. This isn't just for painting brows or copying poems. It's your sword, your voice, your presence in the court's unspoken dialogue. One of your fellow court ladies passes you a folded letter. It smells faintly of plum and pine smoke. You unfold it delicately, never crack the creases too loudly, and smile. The calligraphy is elegant, the wording cryptic in a flirtatious way. A nobleman, perhaps a minor prince, is inviting you to a moon viewing gathering. The implication is clear. Your reputation, your presentation, has caught his attention. Historians still argue whether hikimayu was purely aesthetic or served as an age-old status signal. Some believe the practice marked a transition to womanhood, or even a gesture of piety, removing the wildness of natural brows in favor of cultivated beauty. Whatever the case, it spoke volumes, even in silence. You pause before your reply. What brushstroke will you choose? What scent will you infuse the paper with? These things matter. In fact, they might matter more than your actual reply. When the moon viewing evening arrives, you're ready. Hair long and oiled, robes layered in seasonal colors. Plum, Frost white, maybe a hint of green for winter's edge. Your face is a perfect canvas. And your eyebrows, once again, are black ink ovals poised like punctuation. The gathering is held in an open pavilion, with brazier fires flickering and sake poured in shallow cups. No direct eye contact. Too forward. You sit behind a gauzy screen, your silhouette visible in the firelight. The prince reads poetry aloud, probably something referencing dew or longing. You nod at the right moments. When he finally approaches, his words half question, half verse, you respond not with speech, but with your sleeve. Just a flicker, enough to show you're amused. This, too, is courtship. Not declarations but echoes. Not fireworks but ripples. The flick of a fan can mean everything or nothing, depending on how it's received. The ink on your brows might as well be a love letter, one silently signed. Of course, not everyone in the palace finds this pace romantic. You've heard mutterings from visiting diplomats, especially those from China or Korea. Why do they paint their faces like ghosts? One once whispered, but they don't understand. In high-end Japan, the pale face, the hikamayu, the layered robes, they're not masks, they're signals, their elegance encoded. And not everyone is born to it. Strids, that's the dirty little secret of court beauty. Behind the perfection lies hours of labor, hidden assistance, and frankly, a bit of luck. A good servant knows how to grind ink so fine it glides on like a whisper. A trusted friend will warn you if your brow shapes are lopsided. One court diary even notes a woman missing an imperial visit because her eyebrow paint had smudged. Yes, really. Imagine ghosting your boss because of makeup malfunction. Very on brand. Some fringe historians argue that the entire look, the white face, the inked brows, the blackened teeth, was meant to neutralize eroticism, to make faces more symbolic than seductive. They suggest the beauty ideal was about status display, not attraction. Maybe. Or maybe it was just what people found beautiful. Trends don't always need a purpose. Still, there's something undeniably surreal about seeing 50 women in a hall, all with matching moon-like faces and brows like twin dark birds. It's uniform, but also deeply individual. You start noticing the variations. One prefers oval brows. Another paints hers thinner, like a fine comma. One daring noblewoman even experiments with blue ink. Scandalous, but whispered about with admiration. In your chamber that night, you remove the day's adornments slowly. The powder, the ink, the hints of rouge, a basin of warm water, a cloth so fine it feels like mist. The brows disappear first, gently wiped until you're barefaced again. A little ghostly, maybe, a little undone. You stare at your reflection in the polished metal mirror, flickering with candlelight. Without the hikamayu, you look younger. Less composed, but also more real. Codes. That's the duality of court life, performance and personhood always teetering on a knife's edge. Tomorrow, you'll paint them anew. Brows reborn like dawn after moonset. And as you lie back on your mat, the night settling around you like a silk robe, you realize something in a world of silence and suggestion. Those 2 little arcs of ink might just be the loudest thing about you. You wake again before sunrise. This time to the shivering hush of winter. The paper screens breathe cold air into the room. Somewhere in the distance, a bamboo water fountain tips and knocks with a wooden clunk. You lie still for a moment, wrapped in your layers, imagining the world outside coated in frost and plum-colored shadow. There's a phrase courtiers like to whisper this time of year: Yuki no shita ni hana ari. Beneath the snow, flowers bloom. It's a poetic reminder that beauty is often hidden, subtle, waiting, which is exactly the kind of thing that would be embroidered into a fan or scribbled on the back of a love note. Today, you're expected to attend a poetry contest, and yes, an actual contest judged by high-ranking nobles where winners gain prestige and losers stew in polite disgrace. Think of it like the Heian equivalent of a rap battle, only with more incense and fewer bass drops. But before you go anywhere, it's time for makeup. Again, the eyebrows, you now do almost from memory. The plucking, still uncomfortable. The shaving, done with a blade no wider than a hairpin. And the painting, Slow, graceful arcs using soothe ink ground with spring water. No one speaks during this part. Even the servants know better than to interrupt. It's like a miniature tea ceremony on your face. Mainstream history books will tell you that hikame was about fashion, about the ideal face. But fashion in this period wasn't superficial. It was metaphysical. Aesthetic perfection was considered a moral good. If your appearance harmonized with seasonal colors, poetic sentiment, and inner dignity, then clearly your soul was in tune as well. Messy eyebrows weren't just a grooming fail, they hinted at emotional imbalance. A wobbly spirit. At court, women judged each other by scent as much as sentence structure. Perfume was layered in clothing, stored in sachets, and even applied to hair combs. Codes. Some of the more daring ladies flavored their paper with exotic woods or mixed flower oils to stand out. You once heard about a court lady who became famous just for the way her robes smelled. Scent, style, presence, it all worked together. You arrive at the poetry contest with a perfect brow line, your ink still drying. The room hums with subtle tension. Silk rustles like leaves. Attendants kneel, offering trays of inkstones and fine brushes. You find your place behind a low screen, adjusting your sleeves just enough to show the inner lining, a soft peach to match the winter plum. One by one, poets are called. They recite their verses aloud, voices controlled, their expressions unreadable. The themes are seasonal: regret, longing, snowfall. A courtesan speaks of a lover glimpsed through frosted bamboo. A priest writes of plum blossoms falling on temple roofs. You scribble quickly, whispering the cadence in your head. When your turn comes, you rise slowly. You don't rush. Even standing is part of the performance. You glide forward and recite your verse. Something about melting snow and remembered warmth. You're not sure if it's your best work, but your delivery is steady. One of the judges, an older noble with laugh lines and a reputation for cruelty, smiles faintly. That's probably a good sign. Later, in the side corridor, someone presses a folded note into your hand. It's unsigned, of course, but the handwriting is familiar. You recognize the brush pressure, thick at the top of strokes, light at the bottom. You smile to yourself. It's not about what's said, but how. The court is full of these quiet flirtations. A fan left open on a railing, a scent worn 2 days in a row, an inked brow arched just slightly higher than before. Courting here is less about passion, more about pacing. And you've learned the rhythm. Still, scholars argue whether these contests were truly judged on talent, or if social status quietly decided the winners. Maybe your verse won today because it was good. Maybe it won because your sleeves were perfect. Or maybe, just maybe, the prince liked the angle of your eyebrows. Historians still debate the extent to which appearance influenced politics in the high-end court, and whether artistic contests were ever actually fair. Back in your chamber, you unpin your hair. A strand of ink smudged cloth falls from your sleeve. Something you used to blot your brow earlier. You laugh softly. There it is, a tiny piece of evidence that even the most composed court lady might need a touch-up now and then. You place it carefully into a drawer, alongside dried plum petals and broken fans. A kind of memory box, your own archive of days spent shaping yourself into someone beautiful, not just for others, but for the aesthetic order of things. You fall asleep thinking about the contest. Not about winning, but about how it felt to speak aloud, to paint your face like a poem and step into a world where every glance is a metaphor. Tomorrow, someone might quote your verse in passing, or echo your scent in their sleeves, or write a new line inspired by your inked expression. You smile in the dark. Beneath the snow, indeed, there are flowers. It's deep into the night when the palace stirs again. This time for a moon viewing. You slip from your mat like a ghost, wrap yourself in darker robes, and follow the flicker of lanterns toward the veranda. The air is soft, edged with the faintest scent of burning aloeswood. Moonlight spills over everything like pale ink on parchment. Tonight isn't about poultry or rank. It's about gazing, in the most cultivated, deliberate sense. A group of courtiers, men and women, gathers quietly, their faces tilted upward, expressions caught somewhere between reverence and aesthetic boredom. You settle beside a lady whose eyebrows curve like the stroke of a crane's wing. She doesn't speak, just tilts her fan toward the moon. The concept is tsukimi, moon viewing, a ritual equal parts appreciation and performance. You're expected to sigh just right, to comment on the clarity or imperfection of the moon's face, to share a verse only if it feels absolutely earned. You say nothing at first, letting the silence stretch, listening to the wind tickle the bamboo stalks. Mainstream historians often paint High Court life as stifling and repetitive. But to live in this moment is to understand the hypnotic pull of beauty practiced to the edge of madness. You don't just look at the moon. You fold yourself into its rhythm. You become the watcher who's being watched. And yes, even under the moonlight, eyebrows matter. Painted dark, they catch the glow and float above the face like soft birds mid-flight. Real eyebrows would cast shadows, shift with emotion. These don't. They remain still, permanent, serene. Some scholars argue that's the point. The High Court craved control over chaos, even if it meant repainting your own humanity. There's an attendant nearby offering sake, chilled in a lacquered bowl. You sip carefully. The sweetness cuts through the cold. Someone begins to hum a fragment of court music, slow and mournful, plucked on a biwa. The tune drifts upward like incense smoke. You lean back and glance sideways at your companions. Their expressions are carved from moonlight and powder. Not a smudge out of place. Not a laugh too loud. And yet, somehow, there's intimacy here. You're sharing silence with others who also learned to shave themselves smooth of imperfection. Like ink across silk, your identities blur and flow. Suddenly, a poem emerges, whispered just loud enough for the group. No wave disturbs this moonlit cup of water. Only the wind breathes. You recognize the voice. It's the same prince who smiled at your verse 2 days ago. You don't turn toward him, but you let the corners of your mouth tilt upward. Your eyebrows, perfectly drawn, remain unmoved. Now, here's the fringe tidbitting. There were entire handbooks devoted to moon viewing etiquette. We're talking lunar calendars, recommended robe colors, even sample verses to memorize in case of awkward silence. One volume, long since lost, was rumored to include emergency excuses in case your poem failed to impress. Things like blaming the humidity or moon's angle, not that anyone would admit using them. The prince begins reciting again. This time, he stumbles, just slightly, enough to make 3 fans flutter with politely concealed laughter. One lady pretends to cough. Another lowers her gaze, probably to hide a grin. It's rare, and therefore delicious, to see him falter. Historians still argue whether these moon viewing gatherings were primarily romantic opportunities or political theatre. Maybe they were both. Maybe every moment in High Court life was a combination of maneuver and metaphor. After all, alliances were often forged between glances, and marriage proposals whispered behind fans. You rise at last, offer a short verse in return. Low, lyrical, a bit teasing. Just enough to show your wit without challenging the prince too directly. His fan dips in acknowledgement. Later, as the group disperses, you pause at the edge of the veranda. The moonlight silvers your sleeves, catches on the arc of your painted brows. You can feel someone watching you. Maybe it's him. Or maybe it's the moon, reflected in the garden's water basin, blurred just slightly by the breeze. Back in your chambers, you undress slowly. The robe folds neatly. The inked eyebrows remain, unbothered. You could sleep with them intact. Some women do. Or you could wipe them away and redraw them at dawn. You hesitate. Then, with a single damp cloth, you erase them. There's something quietly satisfying about that blank forehead. It feels private, like a paused sentence. You crawl into bed, your thoughts still full of moonlight, music, and silent battles of wit. The court is a place of masks and metaphors, sure. But it's also a stage where your painted eyebrows get to flirt back. You're up before sunrise. Not because anyone forces you to be, but because in this world, timing is everything. Dawn is when the palace feels clearest, like an ink wash before the brush is lifted again. You pad quietly across the tatami, soft tuss brushing the edges of woven straw, and pour cool water into a porcelain bowl. The air bites a little. Good. You need to be sharp. Today, you'll be seen. That means inked brows, layered robes, and every delicate gesture measured against 1,000 years of expectation. You squat beside the mirror stand. It's a low lacquered tray with a polished metal disc, not much larger than your palm. You peer into it, not for a reflection, really, but a suggestion of one. The light is pale, indirect. Your features blur slightly in the metal. Perfect. That's the point. The first step is to shave. Yes, again. Your real eyebrows are stubborn, like weeds at a garden party. You scrape carefully with a razor made of honed bamboo, its edge cool and whisper thin. A scratch here would ruin everything. Not just your look, your day. Maybe your week. You dab a bit of plum blossom paste to soothe the skin. It tingles. Now comes the artistry applying hikimayu. You grind the ink first. A black stick rubbed into a shallow dish with just enough water to turn the surface to syrup. The brush is small, with squirrel hair bristles. Soft enough not to irritate, stiff enough for precision. You lift it, breathe once, and then stroke, pause, stroke again. The result: 2 symmetrical arcs drawn well above where your eyebrows used to be. Not too high, or you'll look perpetually surprised. Not too close together, or you'll seem angry. It's a careful art. Some women use charcoal. Others mix soot with rice starch for a more matty finish. And then there's that one lady, let's call her Lady S, who dabs her brows with growl powder on special days. It's a court rumor, obviously, but nobody's caught her yet. Mainstream historians will tell you hikimayu had symbolic meaning and erasure of self, a display of maturity, a rejection of base emotion. But that's just one layer. A subtler truthing, it also kept you in fashion. And in a world where a poorly drawn line could mean exclusion from a poetry circle, staying stillish wasn't shallow. It was survival. The mirror stares back, a calm and inscrutable. You lean in, adjusting the curve on the left side. Just a little more ig there. Balanced, like 2 cranes about to lift from the reeds. There's no mascara, no glitter, no contouring. But your forehead is now a canvas of calculated serenity. And the rest of your look must follow. Robe layers, at least 5 today, maybe 7. The goal isn't warmth, it's color contrast. You start with a base of pale gray, then soft coral, then a vivid teal lining that peaks at your cuffs. Over that, a long-sleeved robe the color of camellia. The outermost layer is misty white silk, embroidered with drifting clouds. You tilt your head, pleased. Today, you resemble a painting of a dream someone once lost on a scroll. As you fasten the final sash, you remember the tale of a Heian lady whose robes were so perfectly layered, each hue echoing the season's mood, that a rival accused her of sorcery she was exiled for, causing emotional unrest. True, historians still argue whether it was political slander or fashion, so dangerous it disrupted the palace's aura. Either way, she's a legend. There's a knock. An attendant murmurs that the Empress is requesting a gathering in the garden. You smile. You expected as much. The plum blossoms have just begun to open, and nothing draws a crowd like seasonal symbolism. As you glide down the hall, your sleeves trail behind like painted wings. Each footstep is soft, deliberate. You pass a few lesser nobles, and their eyes flick upward. Just briefly, to admire your brows. You don't look back. But oh, you feel it. The garden is already stirring. Soft murmurs drift through the air, punctuated by the clink of porcelain and the hum of insects, waking too early. The Empress sits under a canopy of woven reeds, her robe shimmering like dawn fog. She inclines her head as you approach. You bow. She smiles faintly. Her eyebrows are drawn higher than yours. An older style, more severe. But it suits her. She nods again, giving silent permission for you to sit. Nearby, 2 court ladies whisper behind fans. You catch only a few words. Something about another noblewoman whose eyebrows smudged during morning prayers. A scandal. She was seen bare. The horror. You tuck that tidbit away, adding it to your mental arsenal of palace gossip. Then comes the unexpected, a scroll delivered by a minor poet. He bows, murmurs a name, and backs away. It's a you. The calligraphy is neat but eager. The verse stumbles a little, but the sentiment is clear admiration. He mentions the arc of moonlight above a sleeping lake. You blush, just slightly. Not enough to show. But it's enough to remind you that even inked eyebrows can attract inked affections. Historians might roll their eyes. They'll say these exchanges were common, coded, rarely serious. But they miss the heat of it. The way a few brushstrokes could flutter through your stomach for days. You tuck the scroll into your sleeve. You'll decide later whether to respond. Or let him wander. Back in your chamber, long after the gathering dissolves, you catch your reflection again. The eyebrows still float, proud and perfect. You smile. You made it through the morning with grace, scandal-free, and poetry in your sleeve. Not bad for a pair of painted curves. The afternoon light filters softly through the Shov-G screens now, warming the rice paper just enough to make it glow from within. You've moved indoors, back to your chamber, a quiet pause in a life that rarely allows one. The outer garden is silent save for the soft rattle of bamboo in the wind and the distant pluck of a koto string. You exhale slowly, one breath among many, steady as a monk counting syllables. You recline slightly, your weight supported by a woven cushion. It's not laziness, it's posture. Deliberate, effortless seeming. If anyone peeks in, they must think you've been like this for hours, effortlessly elegant. But secretly, you're reapplying ink. Those brows, they still need tending. This is no one and done ritual. Even perfection fades under the sun. You dab lightly at your forehead with a cloth. Delicate, like patting dew from a lily. One stroke too firm, and you'll smudge the work of your entire morning. The trick is to reapply without revealing you've done so. A nobler woman once claimed her eyebrows remained pristine for 3 days without touch-ups. She was lying, obviously. Or sorcery. Or she never left her chamber. All equally likely. You ink carefully. The new lines glide smoothly over the old. Fresh without looking fresh. A visual sleight of hand. But beyond the careful maintenance lies something even more nuanced in comparison. You live among other painted faces, after all. Each court event becomes an unspoken contest in aesthetic nuance. The slope of a brow, the arch of a line, the space between ink and eye. All of it whispered about during calligraphy readings and incense games. There's a lady from the Western Wing. They call her Snowbrush. You've never heard her real name used aloud. Her brows are always delicately fogged, as if drawn with mist. It's said she grinds her ink from soot collected only during moonless nights. No one has confirmed it. No one dares ask. And then there's you. You don't need myth. Your signature is symmetry. Precise, intentional, a quiet defiance of chaos. You don't aim for mystery. You aim for mastery. As you sip tea, steeped green leaves, sharp and grassy, you watch a paper screen flutter in the wind. It's comforting. A moment where the outside world acknowledges your stillness. The cup warms your fingers, and your thoughts wander. You remember the tale of Lady Taco, a courtier whose beauty was so famed, the emperor ordered a miniature painting of her eyebrows made on silk. Apparently, the artist cried with frustration. He couldn't capture the precise lift of her inner curve. Legend says he eventually gave up painting entirely and became a monk. Historians still argue whether this was a metaphor or a midlife crisis. Even so, the idea stuck. Eyebrows as biography, as art, as power. Your gaze lingers on your writing tools now. Brushes, powders, scented cloths arranged like a scholar's desk. You see more than makeup here. You see memory, identity, even defiance. Centuries later, people will flip through dusty museum catalogues and chuckle. Imagine shaving off your eyebrows and painting new ones. They'll say, lips curled in modern amusement. But they'll miss the point. Because here, now, in this palace wrapped in silence and ceremony, brows aren't vanity. Their voice, a rebellion disguised as routine. And sometimes, their armor. You think of last week's poetry competition. You arrived late, still adjusting your inner collar, and felt every gaze track upward to your forehead. A nobleman from the northern quarter, sharp of tongue and slow of verse, had made a snide comment under his breath, something about birds nesting too low. You didn't flinch. You merely recited your poem with calm breath and perfect enunciation. A delicate seasonal reference, and yes, an allusion to the shape of crescent moons in winter. You won. No one mentioned his comment afterward. But everyone remembered your brows. That's the game. Later, when your attendant brings the evening meal, grilled fish, pickled radish, and just enough steamed rice to maintain decorum, you eat slowly, thoughtfully. The light has dimmed, and a single lamp burns by the doorway, casting your silhouette in shadow. The ink still holds. Your mind drifts again, this time to something more philosophical. There was a monk, centuries ago, who wrote about the impermanence of beauty. He claimed even the most flawless face would fade like cherry blossoms in the rain. Better, he said, to admire the motion of wind through sleeves than the fixity of form. But what if the form is motion? What if the brushstroke of a brow isn't static, but a daily act of becoming? Historians still argue whether these little rituals were acts of self-expression or submission. Maybe both. Maybe neither. That's the brilliance of it. Your brows may be inked, but your identity remains uncaged. As night falls and insects hum outside, you adjust your robes once more. Not for others, for you. The weight, the color, the way they shift when you move. It centers you. Reminds you who you are beneath the paint. You pick up a folded fan, silk screened with golden clouds. With it, you shade your face, not from sun, but from scrutiny. You allow yourself a smile. Small. Enough? Tomorrow there'll be another gathering, another scroll, another whispered judgment. And you'll meet it all with perfectly arched serenity. Let them gossip. You have ink. It's well past dusk now. The glow of day has drained from the palace corridors, leaving behind a hush so complete you can hear the faint dripping of water from a stone basin in the garden. The paper walls are thin, and beyond them, someone plays a melancholy tune on a biwa, the notes lilting, uncertain, as if the instrument is remembering a song it once knew better. You're seated at your lacquered writing box, but your brush has yet to meet the page. Instead, you're thinking about fashion, of all things. Not the glossy, ever-changing kind that parades through foreign lands, but the precise, almost architectural layering of robes, each hue chosen for symbolic resonance. Your inner layer today is willow green, youthful, watchful. The outing pale plum, regal but slightly melancholy. The effect is intentional. It always is. Strict codes. There's a reason courtiers don't just throw on whatever's closest in the morning. Every fold, every fabric, every millimeter of revealed sleeve speaks to your mood, your ambitions, and, let's be honest, how much drama you want to cause at breakfast. The color combinations have names like putrid, mist over water, fox crossing snow, tears of plum. You once heard someone whisper that your palette looked like moonlight weeping. You took it as a compliment, and yes, the eyebrows must match, which brings us to contrast, a concept deeply appreciated in your world. Pale skin, dark brows, soft robes, sharp glances. This isn't contradiction. It's harmony through opposition. Just as a haiku needs silence between syllables, beauty here thrives on restraint balanced with boldness. Still, sometimes you wonder, who started all this? The fashion historians blame Fujiwara no Michinaga, the power behind the throne quarter, who basically ran the empire during the Heian period. He's the one who turned elegance into strategy, who understood that taste could rule more effectively than a sword. He surrounded himself with poets, painters' lovers, and, yes, women with eyebrows like swallow wings. Of course, some scholars argue it wasn't him at all. They point to earlier Chinese influences, or even ritual Shinto practices tied to purification and transformation, strict codes. There's a theory floating around that shaving the natural brow was linked to coming-of-age ceremonies. Another links it to the idea of spiritual rebirth, wiping the slate clean, literally, to draw yourself anew. Historians still argue whether these ideas filtered in gently or were strategically adopted to outshine rivals. You're not sure it matters? What's clear is this. Once the trend took hold, it never let go. You shift your weight on the tatami mat, drawing your knees beneath you. Your robe rustles like wind through reeds. You glance at your polished mirror again. Not to admire, to check. The lighting's changed after all, and in flickering lamplight, a good brow can look like a bad omen. You reach for your ink. Just a touch, just in case. The brush is familiar in your hand, like a secret. It's the same one you use for writing poems. Delicate bristles shaped to a fine point. You dip it slowly, twist it against the stone, and breathe. Then, stroke, short, angled, decisive. Your left brow hums back to life. You repeat the motion on the right, your hands steady now. There, balance. Outside, a breeze lifts the edge of the noren hanging by the hallway entrance. The scent of pine and earth follows it in. Cool, grounding. You feel more like yourself. You remember something your friend whispered during last month's festival. A crooked brow foretells crooked fortune. She said it while sipping sake, eyes already glazed with merriment, but there was a trace of seriousness behind it. You didn't laugh. There's an odd power in the belief that your face tells a story. More than emotion. Destiny. A single stroke too long, and you might doom your future love to drown in melancholy verse. Too thick, and you'll seem brash. Too high, and someone will accuse you of ambition, which, ironically, might be true. And so, you learn to shape perception with every pass of your brush. Not deceit, refinement. Like pruning a bonsai tree, not to change its nature, but to reveal it more clearly. Now and then, you're tempted to experiment. A bolder angle. A shorter line. Something reckless. But then you remember someone's always watching. Even if they don't say a word, even if they smile politely, they see. And the court has a long memory. One time, you dared to wear a brow that tilted slightly inward. An imitation of Lady Muranaka, famed for her tragic love affair with a wandering poet. The next morning, a note appeared in your drawer. No name, just 5 words on a folded slipping. Melancholy suits you too well. You wore rounder brows for a month after that. Just in case. Tonight you reach for your fan again, not out of modesty, but comfort. The painted fabric rests cool against your cheek, and your eyelids begin to feel heavy. The room around you is still, the silence so complete you can hear your own breath. A few fireflies drift the open screen, little sparks in the dark, like commas in the sentence of night. You remember an old poem by Lady Cixi, ink dark, the lines of my unseen thought, etched not in letters, but upon the brow. You recite it silently now, lips unmoving. You wonder what people centuries from now will make of all this. They'll probably call it bizarre, exotic. Maybe they'll reduce it to a bullet point in a textbook. But you know better. You know it was art. Discipline. Expression. Protection. A whole language whispered through pigment and poise. And tomorrow you'll speak it again. The sky is still dark, though it carries that faint silver tone that suggests morning isn't far. Somewhere, a rooster is making up its mind to crow. You shift slightly on your sleeping mat, the crinkle of silk against silk soft enough not to wake the others, but loud enough to feel like a rebellion. You've slept in your robes again, part comfort, part readiness. There's a poetry contest this morning, and your entry is due before sunrise. Not just any contest. This one's hosted by Lord Sadazane, who is notorious for judging not only the poem, but the manner of delivery, the scent of your sleeves, and yes, how precisely your brows frame your eyes during the recitation. Welcome to your reality, where words are battles and beauty is armor. You rise slowly, not from grogginess but from habit, folding each movement with care. Your writing tools are already laid out, the inkstone gleams faintly, and a single firefly, confused by your lamp, hovers nearby like a wandering muse. You watch it for a moment before dipping your brush. This morning's poem must be about longing. That's the theme. As if longing were ever optional around here. You write egg. Beyond the hills, the moon lingers, as if waiting for one more glance before the mist takes her. You sit back. Not bad, not your best, but it carries the right melancholy, distant ache rather than a sob. That's what wins favor. Overt emotion is for amateurs. You've learned to distill your heartbreaks into dew. As the ink dries, you tilt your mirror again. The brows survived the night. Mostly. A slight smudge on the left, probably from that moment you cried over the last stanza. You fix it swiftly. No one must know you edited your poem after it was sealed. That's practically emotional cheating. Once, you watched a senior courtier apply a patch of silk under her brow arch, a technique she said helped hold pigment better in the humid summer months. You tried it. It worked. But it made your skin itch, so now you just reapply and pretend it never happened. Secrets are a courtier's currency, after all. As the first light creeps across the tatami floor, you hear the distant shuffle of other attendants. One giggles. Another murmurs a morning prayer. Outside, the courtiers begin their slow return to visibility, strict codes, like ghosts remembering their bodies. You think about how carefully everyone will be watching today. How your words and your face must carry just the right balance of grace and drama. If your voice trembles at the wrong moment, it'll be read as weakness. If it doesn't tremble at all, you'll be called cold. You miss being a child when you could smudge ink and laugh without consequence. Still, there's power in this performance. Take the case of Lady Tadanaka, who secured her family's fortune with a single gaze over a poetry scroll. Her brows that day were reportedly shaped like distant wings in snow. A compliment repeated so often that scribes began using it as a standard. Codes. Historians still argue whether her victory was due to the poem or the brows. Some say she had help, a quiet alliance with the ink maker's son, who slipped her a rare shade made from crushed violets. Others claim she was just that talented. You suspect it was both. There's a saying whispered among the ladies: beauty is a message only the wise can read. You've never been quite sure if it's flattery or a warning. At last, you join the procession. The corridors are lined with lanterns and hushed attendants. Everyone smells faintly of cedar and plum wine. You clutch your poem like a secret confession, though it will soon be read aloud for all to judge. As you step into the presentation room, the hush deepens. All eyes flick briefly to your face, registering it like a calligraphy scroll. You bow. Slowly, elegantly, and wait. Your name is announced, followed by your rank, and the soft sound of the koto fills the silence like a breath held too long. You raise your gaze to meet Lord Sadazane's. Not fully strict codes, just enough to seem humble and quietly confident. He's wearing a cap embroidered with silver leaves, and his beard has been oiled to perfection. His expression gives away nothing. You read your poem. The words float like drifting incense, each syllable a note of longing. You hear someone exhale. A good sign. When you finish, you lower your eyes and step back. Sadazane nods slightly. Not a smile, but not displeasure. You'll take it. Later, as the event disperses and small groups form around cushions and tea trays, someone stops you in the garden. Your lines, she says. Hath they held such quiet H? You thank her. You pretend you're flattered. But what you're really doing is gauging her tone, watching her brows for any sign of rivalry. Hers are thick today, intentionally unshaped, a trend that's been circling lately, supposedly meant to suggest a natural spirit. You're not sold. On your way back to your quarters, you pass a small pond. The surface reflects the growing morning light, and in it, your face wavers, eyes calm, robes rustling, and brows arched like distant memories. You pause. There's something ancient in the way your reflection looks back. Something that reaches beyond fashion or poetry contests. It's in the discipline, the repetition, the careful reclaiming of your own face every single day. A quiet form of authorship. Your world will never carve your story in stone. That's not how things are done. But with each brow, each line of ink, you leave a whisper of yourself behind. And tomorrow you'll write again. By midday, The air in the Heen Palace grows heavy with the scent of sandalwood and anticipation. You wander the veranda slowly, half hidden behind a length of gauze curtain, your sleeves trailing like echoes. There's an art to appearing as though you have nowhere urgent to be, while absolutely positioning yourself in the right place at the right time. You overhear murmurs about your poem from earlier. One lady claims she felt her own heart cloud over with yearning as you read. Another wonders aloud whether your eyebrows were done in crushed pine soot or a rarer blend. You suppress a smile. Let them speculate. You used the soot, of course. Ground and mixed yourself at dawn with a few drops of plum vinegar. The sharp scent makes your eyes sting just slightly, but that only adds a touch of dewiness to your expression. Accidental beauty. Very fashionable. There's a certain power in being unreadable. Your sleeves rustle as you turn a corner, and there he is. Yes, him. The courtier with the voice like water over stone and the most maddening habit of never looking directly at you. You both pause. You bow. He bows, codes. The moment stretches out like spun sugar. Then, with perfect form, he compliments your poem from this morning, casually noting that it reminded him of an old Chinese verse about lost moonlight. You nod demurely and thank him, fully aware your heart is somewhere near your throat. Your eyebrows, though, perfectly calm, they arch just enough to suggest mild interest. You are a storm in ceremonial layers. He moves on. You don't, not emotionally, at least. Instead, you remain where you are, eyes following the flutter of his sleeves, your fingers fidgeting in the folds of your sash. You'll write about this later, in ink so dark it nearly bites the paper. Back in your room, you find a new letter slipped between your poetry scrolls. The handwriting is delicate but familiar. Lady Nobuko, your closest rival and sometimes friend, has sent you a fragment of her latest waka. I did not think autumn would return so soon. Yet in your shadow even summer winds seem to tremble. It's a compliment, a coded one, maybe a challenge, maybe both. You reply with a verse of your own, carefully choosing words that evoke both distance and affection. This is the game, after all. Poetry as fencing, eyebrows as armor, smile as sleight of hand. By now, you've refilled your ink pot 3 times. The grinding of the inkstone is meditative, almost soothing, though your wrist is beginning to ache. You pause to stretch, then resume shaping your brows for the evening. Tonight is informal. A moon viewing, hosted in the Eastern Gardens, where the ladies and courtiers gather to sip sake and trade verses beneath the silver light. It's less structured than a contest, but no less political. The right phrase at the right moment could shift your social gravity. One wrong word and you're orbiting the sidelines for a month. Tonight, you opt for softer brows, slightly rounded. Less edge, more melancholy. You dab a bit of pearl powder along your cheekbones, just enough to catch the lantern glow. Beauty here isn't meant to scream. It's meant to hum, to haunt, to linger like perfume in someone's memory. Historians still argue whether the moon viewing gatherings of the Heian period were actually about poetry or just an excuse for scandalous glances and covert rivalries. Honestly, it was probably both. When you arrive, the moon is already high, hanging over the water like a slow exhale. You find a place near the edge of the garden, where your silhouette will be visible but not obvious. From here, you can study faces, see whose brows are thinning, whose cheeks are flushed too early from drink, whose kimono patterns repeat last season's motifs. The game is on. As sake flows and verses are passed hand to hand, you compose another poem. This one is lighter, tinged with longing but laced with clever wordplay. When you read it aloud, there's a ripple of laughter. Not mockery, appreciation. You smile, just a touch. You've hit the right note. But then, something odd. One of the younger courtiers, new and overager, stumbles into the gathering and blurts out a verse so clumsy it causes physical pain. His eyebrows are uneven. You can't look away. Neither can anyone else. It's like watching a kimono unravel in real time. And then Lord Sadazane does something unexpected. He claps. Just once, slow, deliberate, bold, he says. like a child who dares to name the shape of clouds. Everyone laughs politely. The poor boy blushes crimson. But you know what just happened. Sadazane has claimed him, adopted him in a way. That boy will be in everyone's poem by morning. You file this moment away for future use. The moon shifts. A breeze lifts your sleeves. The night feels softer now, less about performance, more about reflection. Someone begins singing, a wordless melody carried like silk on the wind. You close your eyes, not from tiredness, but from the weight of it all. The beauty, the absurdity, the delicate rituals that shape your everyday. Later, when the gathering dissolves and people begin drifting back into their silken worlds, you linger a little longer. Not to be seen, just to breathe. In the stillness, you touch your brow gently, the curve of it familiar as a signature. You wonder what future generations will make of these customs. Will they scoff, romanticize? Will they understand how survival sometimes looked like ornamentation? You look up at the moon again, now slightly veiled by a slow-moving cloud, and you wonder, just for a moment, whether she judges your poem. By the time the dew begins to kiss the wooden walkways, you're already awake, though perhaps awake is generous. Let's say your eyes are open, and your body is participating in the general idea of morning. A soft grey light leaks into your chamber, filtered through rice paper screens, strict codes, painting the room in pale ghost tones. You stretch just slightly, then remember that your sleeves are tucked beneath your body. And you now resemble a silken dumpling. You peel yourself from the futon and move toward your mirror, a polished bronze disc, not quite enough to give a flawless reflection, but sufficient for one critical task: eyebrow assessment. You study the smudges of last night's pine suit, faded but still holding their shape. A quick rinse in the basin, a reapplication, and the face you present to the world is once again perfectly curated. Strict codes. As you begin grinding the ink for today's look, you hum under your breath. There's something satisfying about this ritual, strict codes, even if you're mostly doing it for the benefit of others. Historians still argue whether high-end court ladies truly internalized the aesthetic rituals they practiced daily, or if they simply performed them as a means to survive in a world so obsessed with optics. You suspect it's both. Today, your ink mix includes a trace of burnt cloves. It doesn't alter the color much, but it leaves a faint scent that you like. You draw your brows straighter this time, favoring a more austere silhouette, serious but elegant, the kind of look that says, yes, I am capable of writing death, haiku before breakfast. The court is buzzing today. A new imperial edict is rumored to be posted, something to do with changing ceremonial protocols during the spring festival. You're not especially concerned. It's unlikely to affect you directly. But still, gossip flutters down the corridors like wind-borne plum blossoms. You take the long route to the garden, strict codes. Not because you're particularly interested in flowers this morning, but because the long route happens to pass the east veranda. And the east veranda happens to be where he often sits reading. You're not a romantic, of course. You simply enjoy aesthetic symmetry, and he happens to fit rather well into that mental painting you keep arranging in your head. As you drift past, you note his presence, head bowed over a scroll, long fingers absently turning a page. You don't speak. You don't need to. The fact that you're within earshot, wrapped in 12 layers of embroidered longing, is statement enough. You move on. Mid-morning finds you summoned to a calligraphy demonstration. Not your favorite activity, if you're honest. Too much scrutiny, too many chances to get ink on your sleeves. Still, you arrive early and take a seat near the front, angling yourself to be visible but not central. Always the art of strategic invisibility. The room smells like camellia oil and tension. The instructor, an elderly monk with a beard shaped like a punctuation mark, begins by explaining the emotional resonance of line weight. Ink, he says, is a river of the soul. You nod solemnly, pretending not to notice Lady Nobuko stifling a yawn behind her sleeve. When it's your turn, you kneel before the scroll and hold the brush steady. You let your breath settle, The first stroke matters. You choose a single cane jig Y-gen. Subtle grace, the profound in the vague. Your brush dances. The line is bold but not aggressive, the curves deliberate. When you rise, you catch the faintest nod of approval from the monk. Later, you and Noboko find yourselves in the courtyard, sharing a plate of chilled sweet potatoes. His beard could be a character in a play. She mutters, chewing thoughtfully. You laugh, and for a moment, the performance drops. Just two women, tired of being artwork, craving a bit of absurdity. That afternoon, someone mentions Lady Koizumi has taken ill. You nod politely, feigning surprise. But the truth is you'd noticed her pallor days ago. She always favored a more rounded brow, soft and sorrowful, as though her face was in mourning. Her absence shifts the energy of the court ever so slightly. Another orbit realigns. You return to your quarters and take a moment to yourself. The quiet is rare and strange, almost unsettling. You sit at your writing desk and begin a poem. Not for anyone, just for you. In the painted dusk, I lose names like autumn leaves. Even my own face shifts with every mirror's breath. Still, I draw the line anew. The act of writing calms you. There's something oddly empowering about it, too. Everyone sees your eyebrows before they hear your words, but the ink on this page, that's yours alone. Historians often debate whether women of the Heian court had any real power or if they were merely ornamental pawns in a larger male game. What those historians sometimes miss is that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's held in the angle of an eyebrow, or a poem that wounds with precision, or the decision not to rise when summoned, just to make them wait. Evening falls. The sky ripens into 1,000 shades of coral and indigo. You sit by the garden again, watching the coast stir the pond into sleepy spirals. You think about your place in all this, floating somewhere between art and ghost, visible only in the context of others. A servant brings word. The emperor will host an informal verse gathering tomorrow. No theme yet announced. That alone sends half the court into panic. You, however, feel oddly at ease. You've already chosen your phrase. It's been waiting in your throat all day. You rise slowly, sleeves whispering over stone, and return to your chamber. Before bed, you light a small cone of incense and watch the smoke unfurl like ribbon. You rub your brows clean with rose water and whisper your poem to no one. Then you blow out the light. The morning unfolds like parchment left too long in the sun, crinkled with anticipation, smelling faintly of ink and nerves. You're up before the birds, your heart thudding in that familiar, muted panic that always precedes a poetry gathering. Not panic exactly, more like elegant dread, lacquered with politeness. You dress carefully, letting the layers fall with intentional gravity. Pale lavender over silver grey, strict codes, with a whisper of plum silk lining your inner sleeves. Modest but evocative, like a half-remembered dream. You know what you're doing. You know the colour of poetry. And today it's personal. You select your ink with precision, mixing suit from an old pine branch given to you years ago by a lady long gone. Lady Koizumi, actually. A strange circle. She'd once laughed and said, "Use this when you want to write something worth remembering." You smile to yourself. You'd almost forgotten, as you begin to draw on your eyebrows. Today shorter, almost stern, like little punctuation marks on a face that has decided to speak plainly. Your thoughts wander to the emperor's court. These informal verse gatherings are anything but casual. Historians still argue whether they were meant more as artistic expression or political theatre in silk. Either way, each word is a knife in a cherry blossom wrapper, beautiful but not to be underestimated. The venue is a moon viewing pavilion, although the moon will be absent until nightfall. Classic misdirection. You're greeted with murmurs and glances, that typical courtly cocktail of admiration, jealousy, and attempted nonchalance. Fans flutter. Sleeves drift. Someone's already nervously reciting a line under their breath, trying it out like a new pair of shoes. You take your seat. The emperor, serene as always, offers a single word as the theme in Kukanashi. Gardenia, a flower that blooms silently, white and ghostly, fragrant even after it dies. You nearly exhale too loudly. Of course, that's today's theme. The court collectively inhales, as if to say, "Oh, good one." There's an unspoken rule that the simpler the theme, the harder the poetry. Gardenia, it demands nuance. You watch one noblewoman compose a verse on her fan, her calligraphy shaky with urgency. Another already has hers memorized, lips twitching in concentration, and there you sit, unbothered, because you'd written your poem last night, before the theme was known, and somehow it fits. Your turn arrives. You stand slowly, deliberately. Let them see you, your plum and silver, your quiet brow arches like gentle cliffs in the mist. You unfold the scroll and speak softly, letting each word dissolve into the space between breaths. Even in silence, the gardenia outlasts dusk. White against the dark, I were nothing but her name, and still, no one saw me leave. The silence after is the most exquisite applause. No actual clapping, of course. That would be vulgar. But the lack of fan flutter, the frozen stillness of Lady Nobuko's blink, that's when you know. You've landed the verse. The Emperor offers a soft nod. Not approval, exactly, but acknowledgement. And from him, that's as close as you'll ever get to fireworks. You resume your seat, heartbeat slowing like a drum left in the rain. Lady Shizuka leans toward you and whispers, "Your ink is unfair." You offer a soft smile and pretend not to hear her. Later, under a canopy of wisteria, the after-poetry tea unfolds. A breeze carries stray petals across the lacquer trays, tiny confections shaped like flowers, each too pretty to eat. But you eat them anyway, because why not? They taste like sugar and the fleeting illusion of control. You're asked to share your ink mixture. Several ladies are convinced the her gave your poem its edge. You could lie, but instead, you simply say, "Pine suit," from an old friend. That shuts them up in the best possible way. As the gathering thins, you notice him again. Yes, that him. He's talking with a few scribes by the water basin, one hand tucked into his sleeve, the other gesturing as he speaks. You catch his glance for the briefest moment. He raises an eyebrow, not in surprise, but as if to say, "That poem I heard you." You don't respond. Let it hang. Let it bloom and wilt like a gardenia. The return to your quarters is unremarkable, save for the letter waiting on your writing desk. A thin scroll, rolled with red twine. You recognize the seal, a cousin who moved to the mountains years ago. Inside, a single sentence. Do you ever miss being unseen? You sit with that question. Let it age a little. You pour yourself a cup of barley tea and think about visibility, about what it means to be seen, really seen, in a world so obsessed with appearances that it forgets to ask who's behind the ink. Historians sometimes reduce your world to powders and poetry, suggesting that aesthetics were the only tool women had to express anything at all. But they forget the defiance it takes to show up every day, a painted and powdered and poised, knowing full well that your audience might only remember the angle of your brows. And still you write, you ink, you bloom. That evening, with your sleeves tucked neatly beneath you and your lamp flickering low, you sketch another verse before bed. Not for court, not for anyone, just for you. Beneath the white bloom, 1,000 silent questions curl like falling ash. Sleep comes slowly, dragging its feet. But you welcome it like an old rival turned friend. Let it pull you under, back into dreams shaped like brushstrokes and secret glances. Morning arrives, unceremonious and too bright. You blink against the light filtering through washy paper shutters, the soft outlines of the room slow to come into focus. There's no gathering today, no courtly event to prepare for, but your body still rises with practiced grace. You move through your morning motions like someone stepping through silk. Quietly, deliberately, without thought. You make your way to the garden, clutching a small lacquered tray bearing inkstone and brush. The air carries the scent of camellia and damp earth. You settle onto the veranda with a sigh that's more habit than feeling and begin tracing kanji across scraps of used paper. Testing characters like flavors, letting them linger. There's a rhythm to this, a repetition that soothes. You try out old lines of poetry that never made it to scrolls. One about rain slipping off bamboo. Another about the weight of unsent letters. No one will see them. That's the point. Sometimes beauty doesn't need an audience, though you still check over your shoulder. Just in case. Your thoughts drift, uninvited, strict codes, to the inked brows of your peers. You think about Lady Sumi's impossibly high arches, penciled so dramatically they look permanently astonished, strict codes, or the delicate sweep of Lady Noriko's brows, so faint you have to squint. Historians still argue whether these choices were purely aesthetic, or if each line was meant as a coded message, a kind of emotional semaphore for those in the know. You've long suspected the answer is both. A low-ranking attendant passes in the distance, her brows unpainted, her sleeves plain. She nods with just enough respect to avoid gossip. And you wonder, if she inked her brows tomorrow, who would notice? Who would interpret that act as rebellion? As aspiration, or as boredom? One of the lesser-known tidbits you've picked up in whispered scroll margins is that ink itself was sometimes perfumed. During the late Heian period, certain noblewomen added clove or cinnamon oil to their ink mixture. The scent meant to linger as a signature, an olfactory footnote to their presence. Not exactly functional, but undeniably fabulous. You return to your brush. The character for mirror misbehaves under your hand. It strokes a little too anxious. You scrape the paper clean and start again. Later, at midday, you find yourself in an alcove with two fellow court ladies. Lady Akiko is arranging a poetry game with the enthusiasm of someone who's either terribly bored or slightly tipsy. It's hard to tell which. The challenge is simple: each participant must compose using a randomly selected flower and season. You draw your tokens indigo, plum, and autumn. Easy. Or so you think. As you scribble tentative lines on your fan, Akiko flutters hers open and declares, plum trees bow with grace, yet their blossoms turn away. Indigo farewell. You resist the urge to groan. She's done it again. Captured both elegance and heartbreak in 7 swift lines, all while balancing a rice cake on her fan. Show off. Still, your turn comes. Autumn paints in blue. Not the sky, but plum branches that forget to bloom. There's a pause, then polite nods. Lady Wren chuckles softly and mutters, so moody, which you take as a compliment. You win, apparently, but prizes are intangible. Perhaps just the faint flicker of envy in Wren's glance. That'll do. The afternoon slips by. Tea is poured, silks are smoothed, secrets are traded like currency. You overhear that Lady Fyoko has been using ground pearl in her face powder again, even though her skin's already pale enough to haunt. Someone else has commissioned a fan painted with only the color night. No design, just night. You pretend not to care. But your brain is already sketching what your version of night would look like. Later still, you visit the incense room, an underused sanctuary where people pretend to meditate but mostly gossip. You kneel beside the warm ash burner and inhale gently. The scent today is sandalwood and a touch of frankincense, probably smuggled in through a monk's sleeve from Nara. You think back to a curious historical theory you once heard. Some scholars believe the entire obsession with scent, color, and aesthetic ritual in Heian court life evolved as a coping mechanism. Since power was hereditary and mobility limited, the elite invented complex games of taste and refinement to simulate agency. Even inked eyebrows, they say, were a form of chosen identity. Painted defiance beneath the layers of obedience. You like that theory. You don't entirely believe it, but you like it. On your walk back from the incense room, you pass a cluster of junior attendants huddled around a scroll. They giggle and glance your way, clearly not expecting you to notice. You do. The scroll is a satire poem, delicately mocking court beauty standards. You pretend not to see the line that reads Chew, her brows so bold they frighten even the lamp flame. Rude. Accurate. But rude. You allow yourself one sharp eyebrow raise in their direction, and their laughter dies in an instant, satisfaction acquired. That evening, you retire earlier than usual. The moon's already high, casting long silver fingers across your tatami floor. You light a single lamp and sit down at your writing desk, today's thoughts blooming into prose as your brush dances lightly across the page. Your final poem of the day is not for the emperor, not for a contest, not even for your mirror. I ink my own face with questions no one will ask. That is beauty too. You seal it in a drawer. Perhaps one day, a scholar will find it and argue about what you meant. Perhaps not. Either way, it was written. And for now, that's enough. You wake before the sun and slip through the corridors like a rumor. Today, there's something different in the air. An energy beneath the stillness. As if the paper walls themselves are holding their breath. A message arrived late last night. You haven't opened it yet, but you know the seal. It bears the family crest of a prince you once exchanged poems with under a cherry tree, 3 years and 100 sighs ago. You break the seal slowly. Inside is not a letter, but a single folded fan. On its surface, one line written in a hand you'd recognize anywhere. Even the ink fades. Shall we pretend it doesn't? Well, that's not subtle. You roll your eyes, but only a little. Historians still argue whether these poetic gestures were courtly flirtations, political jabs, or subtle recruitment into private alliances. You suspect they were all three, depending on who was watching. You tuck the fan into your sleeve, unsure what you'll do with it. But you carry it anyway. Strict codes. At breakfast you sit across from a visiting lady from the western provinces. She's wearing a bold splash of red on her outer robe. Technically unfashionable this season, but you suspect she's making a point. Her eyebrows are drawn in low and long, giving her the air of someone perpetually unimpressed. She tells a story about a court in her province where the women are starting to experiment with different shapes. Arched brows, crescent brows, even brows painted in gold leaf for special occasions. One woman, she claims, wore hers dotted like a constellation. Looked ridiculous, she adds, but bold. You don't say it aloud, but part of you is curious. A constellation, that's either madness or genius. Maybe both. The conversation drifts, but the image lingers. Later in the day, you pass a servant adjusting a mirror in a side chamber. You catch your reflection only briefly, strict codes, but it's enough to notice the fading pigment of your own brows. They'll need touching up. You hesitate. There's a superstition among some ladies, one you half believe, that if you reapply your brows at dusk, it invites bad dreams. But it's mid-morning. You're safe. Probably. In your chamber you open your lacquer box, its compartments filled with tools that feel more sacred than cosmetic. Your ink mixture is drying at the edges, like old memories, but still usable. You dip your brush with care. This time, instead of the usual sweeping arcs, you pull the strokes slightly closer together, a whisper narrower. It changes your face just enough that you look like someone else's idea of you. Someone quieter, someone thoughtful. Or calculating. No one will notice the change outright, but it'll leave a residue in the way they respond. A little more deference. A little less assumption. You pause, brush in mid-air, as a memory floats up, of a friend you once had at court who used to draw her eyebrows as high as possible, right up to her forehead. She claimed it gave her the moral high ground in any conversation. She was half right. No one argued with her. She left court years ago, married off to a provincial noble. You never heard from her again. You still think about her whenever your brush hovers too long. In the corridor outside, a court musician practices on the biwa. The mournful notes slide like mist under the doors and across the floors. You close your eyes. There's something so achingly deliberate about music here. It never seems to exist just for pleasure. Always layered. Always signaling. Kind of like your eyebrows, you think. By mid-afternoon, you're summoned to a poetry reading in the south garden. You make your way there beneath maple branches heavy with fire-colored leaves. You can feel a shift in season now. The air is edged in cold, the kind that lingers in your sleeves long after sunset. The gathering is small, elite. Everyone pretending not to be listening too closely. You notice immediately, two women in the group have done something unexpected. They've left their brows unpainted, completely bare. That used to be a style centuries ago, before face fashion shifted toward the symbolic and abstract. You try not to stare, but it's like watching a painting slowly erase itself. Minimalism, one of the murmurs catching your gaze. It's having a moment. You stifle a laugh. The court is always rediscovering things it once abandoned. Fashion as memory loss. You sit down on a cushion, your sleeves tucked neatly, your new brows arched just enough to look slightly curious. The poems today are about endings. Falling leaves, aging silk, the sound of wind through bamboo. Nothing new, but that's the point. There's comfort in repetition. One woman reads a poem you swear you've heard before, but it's altered, subtly. A word changed here, a metaphor shifted there. Is it theft? Tribute? Evolution? Historians still argue whether Han poets considered originality sacred or if reshaping a poem was the highest form of reverence. You lean toward the latter. After all, you've revised your own verses, so often they're practically strangers. As the sun tilts westward, the gathering thins. Someone offers you a persimmon, perfectly ripe, the skin like layered orange glass. You bite in. Sweet and oddly grounding. Sometimes it's the small things, fruit, fabric, fragrance, that keep you tethered to the world. Back in your quarters, you unroll a scroll from your youth. It's one of your first attempts at poetry. The characters are clumsy, the rhythm uneven. Your brows back then would have been painted in trembling beginner strokes. You were 16, terrified of your own voice. You don't laugh at the scroll. Instead, you trace the faded ink with a fingertip and feel a soft fondness bloom in your chest. Not nostalgia, exactly. More like ignition. That version of you is still in here somewhere, watching, waiting, inky brush in hand. You place the scroll back gently. Then, with a flick of your sleeve, you pull out the folded fan from this morning and leave it on the windowsill. Not as a response, just as a pause. You'll let him wonder. Twilight slips through the corridors like a silk scarf caught in a breeze, soft and trailing, strict codes, staining everything in gold. You walk slowly through the east wing, the soles of your socks whispering against polished wood, following the scent of incense and faint laughter. Tonight is an informal gathering, a moon viewing, though the sky is already half obscured by clouds. Still, strict codes, moonlight matters less than the performance of admiring it. You arrive at the terrace and ease into your spot, joining half a dozen courtiers lounging on cushions like cats in well-tailored silk. Someone passes you a cup of plum wine. You raise it in mock solemnity, sip, and nearly choke. It's far stronger than expected. Apparently, someone's brought contraband spirits from Satsuma. Rebellion in a cup. A courtier nearby, drunk on both wine and his own metaphors, launches into a tirade about aesthetics. Beauty, he slurs, is merely the shadow of loss. A stretched then over time. You nod sagely, as though you didn't hear that same line from a different poet last week, in a slightly more coherent tone. There's laughter, soft, breathy, the kind people use when they're pretending not to judge. One woman reclines, her face half hidden behind her sleeve. Her eyebrows are striking, arched thick, dramatic, almost theatrical. Do they terrify you? She asks, catching your glance. Only a little, you reply. In a good way, she smirks. They should. The gathering shifts into a gaming. Each person must describe the moon in one line without using the word moon. It's trickier than it sounds. The challenge, as always, is to sound timeless and tragic without seeming to try too hard. You jot down your line. A thief wearing light as a disguise. Applause, or at least the polite version of it, nods and murmurs. You take a small bow. As the evening deepens, conversation turns more speculative. Someone brings up an obscure court, alleging a lady who once inked her eyebrows in the shape of feathers. Delicate, pointed upward at the outer edge. The story goes that each stroke was matched to a bird she'd dreamed of that week. She never explained her choices aloud, just let people wonder. Some say she was mad. Others claim she started a quiet revolution in eyebrow fashion, but no one dared copy her outright. Historians still debate if she was real or just an allegory stitched together from too many diary fragments and court gossip. You hope she was real. Back in your chambers later that night, you try drawing a feathered brow. Just one. It looks strange, striking, like it belongs to someone wilder than you. You wash it off, but the idea stays. You stretch out on your sleeping mat, eyes tracing the shadow of bamboo branches swaying outside your window. The court is quieter now. The night has settled into its hum. In the stillness, you remember something, an often comment from your poetry teacher years ago. After one of your first public readings, he had leaned in close and whispered, "If you want to last here, don't just be good, be a mystery." You took it to heart. The painted brows, the carefully chosen silks, the poems folded into fans and left like breadcrumbs. They're all part of that quiet performance. You don't need to be the most beautiful, the most talented, the most admired. You just need to be remembered. Somewhere down the hallway, someone plucks a koto string and lets it resonate. A single, soft vibration. It lingers in the air long after the sound has ended. You reach for your ink kit again. Your fingers move without needing a plan. This time, you draw your brows not for the mirror, not for a gathering, but for yourself. Small shifts, gentle curves, they frame your face like quotation marks, inviting interpretation but offering none. And then, quite unexpectedly, you laugh, quietly, softly. The absurdity of it all. How so much weight can be carried by two short lines above your eyes. Lines that can be washed away in seconds and redrawn the next morning. And yet they matter. They shape how the world sees you, how you see yourself. The idea strikes you, or maybe it's all theatre. Yes, but that doesn't make it false. A performance can still be sincere. You close your ink kit, set it beside your sleeping mat, and exhale. Not tired, exactly, just full. Outside the clouds shift, and the moon finally appears, pale and distant, like a promise no one really believes in anymore, but still clings to out of habit. You don't describe it this time. You just look. Moments like this, you think, might be what the ancient poets were chasing all along. Not beauty, not legacy, just stillness. You nestle into your futon, strict codes, your sleeves tucked around you like gentle armor. The scent of sandalwood from earlier clings faintly to your hair. Your mind flutters briefly over tomorrow's tasks, but even those seem less urgent now. You've left enough behind. Poems, glances, shaped ink lines, that your presence will echo long after you've walked out of the room. And that, maybe, is the truest form of beauty, not permanence, but persistence. Morning seeps in gently, pale and filtered through sliding paper screens, as if the sun is trying not to wake anyone too rudely. You stir, strict codes, still wrapped in the weight of your silk robe and the remnants of last night's laughter. The koto string from the corridor haunts your memory like a scent you can't quite place. There's no rush. Time flows slowly here, like ink in water. You rise, stretch, and peer into the polished bronze mirror. The faintest trace of last night's feathered brow remains, a ghost of your rebellion. With a damp cloth, you erase it without ceremony, and then, instinctively, you redraw something subtler, something more grounded. Still elegant, still deliberate, but less theatrical. Today, perhaps, you'll be unreadable instead of unforgettable. At the morning assembly, word buzzes quietly about a new poetry contest. The theming, things that fade. You don't say anything, but you're already composing lines in your head. You suspect half the court is doing the same. Some will pretend they're above it. Others will obsess. A few will commission hostwriters from among the scribes. All of it. Perfectly normal. You pass a noble woman on the walkway. Her eyebrows a precise square of ink, just above where her real ones once grew. It's the classic hikikomori look, older than the Genji tales. She raises one painted brow in amusement, as if she's caught you studying her. You smile, bow slightly, and move on. Your own brow game, you realize, has become a kind of personal dialect. Some days it speaks fluently, other days it stutters, but it always says something. At mid-morning, your writing teacher appears at your door. He's older now, softer around the jaw, more prone to talking in long metaphors that end nowhere, but he still watches with the sharpness of a hawk. You're becoming more difficult to read. He murmurs after studying your face.
You shrug.
I'm still figuring out the story. Aren't we all? He replies, before handing you a folded paper. The assignment, a short essay on beauty in court life, deadlining tomorrow. Of course, you watch him go and then sit with the paper for a long time. What would you even write? That beauty is a game of symbols. That a single eyebrow curve can collapse or elevate a reputation. That some people fall in love with an arch or a gap or a twist more than with the person beneath it. Or maybe that beauty is just a shared lie I've all agreed to tell one another. A good one, though. A lie that makes things prettier, softer, more livable. You don't start writing yet. Later, at lunch, you overhear a pair of younger courtiers debating whether beauty can be taught or if it's simply inherited. One argues that elegance is genetic. The other insists that with enough lessons, anyone can become captivating. Historians still argue whether high-end ideals of beauty were universally shared across the court or largely defined by a few influential families. Some scrolls suggest trends changed rapidly, even weekly. Others imply long periods of stylistic conformity enforced by powerful tastemakers. Either way, you suspect both nature and practice play a role. Some people simply glow. Others learn how to catch the light at just the right angle. You excuse yourself early and walk the back gardens. A crane startles from a stone near the stream and lifts into the air with that slow, impossible grace only cranes can manage. You envy it for a moment. No makeup, no politics, no painted brows. But then again, cranes can't write poems. That evening, you begin your essay with a single line. Beauty is not a thing we carry. It's a trail we leave behind. You pause. Consider changing it. But no, this feels right. You write into the night, the candle guttering low. You mention eyebrows, yes, and powder, and robes dyed with crushed flowers. But you also write about the moments between things. When a hand brushes a sleeve, when a line of verse cuts too deep, when someone turns their head just enough to suggest they're not ready to look at you yet. You write about silence, about longing, about pretending. And in that silence, something shifts. You realize you've grown into the very court you used to fear. It has shaped you. And, subtly, you've shaped it right back. The essay ends before you want it to, as all things here do. You sign it simply, fold it neatly, and leave it on your teacher's mat. He won't comment. Not directly. Maybe he'll nod. Maybe he'll quote it at someone else weeks later and act as if it came to him in a dream. That's how things work here. As you lie down again, the mirror catches one last glint of your drawn brows. They're uneven, just slightly, but you let it be. That's part of the charm now. Perfect is overrated. Outside, the cicadas start their nightly lullaby. The air is warm and thick with the scent of garden jasmine. And for the first time in a while, you don't feel like you're performing. You feel present. There's a whisper of something ancient in that feeling. Like you've brushed fingers with all the courtiers who came before, all the poems whispered into silk, all the painted faces that blinked into candlelight and vanished with the centuries. But here you are, still awake, still drawing, and now it's time to let go. Let the echo of footsteps in lacquered halls dissolve into stillness. Let the scent of plum blossoms, faint and fading, drift beyond memory. The court, with all its painted faces and whispered poems, has quieted. The ink has dried. The fans have closed. No more games tonight. You stretch out once more. Your head nestled softly into the pillow, sleeves pulled like a silk tied around you. The room is dim now, the candle long extinguished, shadows curling at the edges of the tatami floor. Outside, a night breeze rustles the bamboo, the sound like a lullaby written in leaves. Somewhere, a bell chimes, maybe in a nearby temple, maybe just in your imagination. You feel it all slowing, your breath, your thoughts, strict codes. the gentle rhythm of your heart syncing with the hush of the world around you. You've walked through 1,000 paper doors, listened to laughter over lacquered trays, felt the weight of beauty and the lightness of letting it go. And now, there's nothing left to hold on to. Only this moment, this hush. This fading thread of story still lingering like a ribbon of smoke. Let it wrap around you, soft and weightless. Let it lull you under. You're safe here. You're remembered. And even if the ink washes away by morning, what you carried and what you left behind still glows. So rest now, quietly. Let the world dim. Let dreams take their place. Good night.